So today we're going to be covering avoiding transaction failing. So all of the fails, I know, I reached out to Candace, I said, are you feeling like this today? Like I'm feeling like Monday, it's just, whoa, like whiplash, right, Candace? And I said, can you jump on and let's just basically have a banter back and forth about the reasons why some of these deals are falling apart and maybe some strategies on why and how we can keep them together. So I have on the screen, I had Shannon put together, this is actually our numbers. So we actually tracked all the way back to 2012, but pretty consistently, you can see the yellow in 2022, always around 15%. This is our office transaction when we talk about rescissions and decancellations for whatever reason. If these deals cancel because of inspection or because of finance, you'll notice that the line goes up, and you'll see in 2020, it went up to close to almost 40% when that stay-at-home order was initiated. That was the impact that it had on our business. And what's concerning to me as I look at it from our standpoint, in July, our rescission rate is up from June to July. You can see pretty stable under the 20 mark, but you can see that little bump of about 5%. That's a big deal for all of you. It means a lot more work. It means that Candace and I are fielding a lot more calls. It means that we have to help with staff time to make sure that we can come up with different strategies to keep deals together. So that's a real number based on today. And I don't like seeing that rise because it means a lot more work. So we're going to come up today with some ideas. I'm going to have Candace, we're going to go slide by slide and giving you guys some tips. The first one we'll talk about would be, can you back out on Form 17? And the answer is yes. So it's super important. If you're a listing agent, you get that Form 17 attached as a supplement to the listing so that you don't run the clock. It happened to me. I was pretty busy, and on my listing in CTAC, I actually just got a notice of rescission because of the Form 17. We had thought that we could, with the way that title was taken, that they would be exempt because the seller did pass away. But our attorney looked at the whole situation and how they recorded the house and the way that the house was conveyed in a trust. It was not exempt from Form 17. So I ended up putting the Form 17 after about a week under contract. And unfortunately, the buyer used the Form 17 as a way to terminate the contract. So as soon as I got the notice of termination, I went and talked to my seller and we put it back to market. But a couple things, definitely have it in your supplements if you're a listing agent. And then just realize that buyers have 3 days to terminate. They don't even have to give you a reason. They could say that they didn't like the color of the house or the neighborhood, or maybe they found something out on that Form 17 that didn't appeal to them. They do not have to provide a reason in Washington state. They can just send over the 90A and they exit the contract, and then I have to go back to market. There's nothing I can do to try to salvage that. Any other stories, Candace, that you can see with Form 17, or any tips that you've seen to keep that, keep them from canceling the deal on a Form 17?
I mean, I think it's just those double set of eyes and verify. If you're not certain of, who has to sign it or who doesn't have to sign it, find out. Like, these are imperative things that need to be complete before you
go to market.
Before you go to market, and just double check if they've missed an item on there, or, scroll through and say, hey, can you go ahead and get this updated? The sooner the better.
Okay, awesome. From a buyer standpoint, you need to make sure you understand the new contract. Form 17 does have that provision on page 1 now, where you have time to have your buyer review the Form 17. But if you've waived, if you're in a multiple offer situation and you waived number 1, well, you've received it on number 1 on the receipt page, and then you waived on number 2, it's going to make it very difficult for you to terminate if you have to prove that there was a material breach on the Form 17 by the seller, and it may require an attorney to look at your Form 17. As your designated broker, I don't have the ability to sometimes make those decisions based on termination. If something is not properly filled out, that is up for an attorney to decide whether you have the right to terminate. But clearly, if it's just a delivery of a receipt and we're in the first 3 days, and you haven't waived your 3-day right to revoke your offer, you can simply send over a 90A and get you out of the deal. So it makes it a very easy out for a buyer. So watch that as a listing agent, especially as you start to see more inventory pop up. I mean, it could be just simply as the neighbor down the street listed their home and they like that house better.
Yep.
They don't have to provide a reason. So that could be the reason why I lost my buyer lost my buyer on my seller today. Let's go to the next slide. So Candace is going to talk about the earnest money deposit. On that is starting to see a rise on failures of this. You want to explain what this would be?
Well, yeah, so it says it here, give enough time. So have that conversation with your buyers. How quickly can you get the earnest money deposit over to escrow? If they're going to be wiring, at least buy enough time, put an extra day in there if you need to. It's easier to be countered on something like that than it is to just not give enough time and not deliver. Essentially, this is a way to go back on the market. They failed to timely deliver the earnest money deposit. I just recently had earnest money deposit delivered late, a day late. You know, and the question to my seller, do we want to go back on the market? You know, we had a plan to do a price reduction. Do we want to go ahead and just do the price reduction, put it back on the market? You know, it's kind of playing a little bit of hardball as well. But if they do deliver late, make sure that you get your Form 34 and everybody's in agreement on the receipt date.
Great. And then 90B, anytime you have, so kind of in Washington state, you've got notices that have to be delivered that kind of correlate with those contingencies that are within the contract. And so if you're a new broker, you might want to review after our call today. Kind of a top tip would be to just go in and look at all of the 90A, B, C, D. It goes all the way to Z now. And 90B is the one that is the only one, there's not very many, where the seller has the right to terminate. Most of the notices in Washington are prepared, in essence, for the buyer to terminate, or contingencies within the contract for the buyer to terminate. This is one, like Candace explained, 90B is the one that the seller can actually send over. So it puts the seller in the driver's seat to possibly terminate if they maybe have another backup buyer that would be better than the one you're currently with. If you fail to deposit earnest money in time or fail to deposit at all, that is the way to get the seller to go back to market, or to sometimes it's just kill the deal, you know, so that you can figure out where you're going to go next. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to spend a bulk of our time tonight really talking about, with Candace, the debate of the hour is, do we do a pre-inspection? Do we have an inspection? How does a negotiation? What are some top tips? Because most of the failure, when I looked at Best Choice Realty, our failures in the last 30 days, most of them had to do with inspections. And sometimes that's good, because we want to show that, you know, if they've done an inspection, there's certainly a lot of repairs. We don't want our buyer to feel like they're getting sold a big, what I call a money pit. They don't want a money pit that we're selling. And so oftentimes we will show how we negotiate. And what I don't want to have happen is that if the house, you have to go back to the market to go find your buyer a home, and you can't find what you're looking for. And then the prices have gone up. And so now we're looking in a different area or a completely different price range. You want to kind of get a good handle of what to consider when you're looking at inspections. So I first want to kind of talk about, do we rely on the pre-inspection, Candace? I mean, what is your philosophy on that? If you have a buyer and they're going out to look at homes, and you see in King County that they're providing a pre-inspection, how do you advise your buyer so that they're protected?
I mean, I think the pre-inspection is helpful, but I'm still always going to encourage my buyers to do their own due diligence and really kind of leave that up to them. I'm also very cautious about a pre-inspection being done by the seller. That's just, and that's because I want these guys to work with me later on down the line. I don't want them to come back and say, oh my gosh, you know, we waived that inspection and now this is happening. You know, it's like, we did our own due diligence. Yes, that was there. It was very helpful and it gave us an ease. peace of mind, but we still went on ahead and scheduled our inspection, did a pass fail inspection, something to that set that way. So I personally, I don't like to use somebody else's inspection. However, I will say on the flip side, at this point in time where we're at in this market, I'm encouraging my sellers to do a pre-inspection and kind of be in the know, because this is where people are backing out.
Mhm.
This is where, I mean, that's the number one reason they're
Yeah.
backing out. And maybe they're not using it 100% for the items, but I will tell you, and I don't blame them, our buyers right now in this market with the rates that they're paying, they're very picky.
Yeah, we
Picky.
talked about that a little bit, right? Where it's like, on average, they're paying $500,000
Yeah.
for a property.
Yeah.
In our office alone, and maybe 750,000. And so when you get or when you see an inspection report, or you don't see an inspection report, you wonder, what is the seller hiding? And I'm not going to be paying $600,000 and I have basically a money pit that I'm dealing with down the road, or I have to end up paying for an inspection and then have to negotiate with the seller. So it makes it tricky. Certainly, I'm looking at having to kind of go backwards on my house in Renton, Candace, because old guy, estate sale and Renton house, and there's nothing actually that on the surface cosmetically that's wrong with it, but I'm not getting offers.
Yeah.
And they're wanting to know, because it's an estate sale, there's no Form 17, so they don't want to spend the money for an inspection. They're asking me, do you have an inspection report? I'm like, dang it, I should have got the inspection report, to your point, right? I should have probably had my seller go ahead and just have an inspection done on the place so that we could use that as a form of a disclosure and say that X, Y, and Z was fixed and X, Y, and Z was not fixed. So the buyers knew that that price matched what that is inside the house.
Yeah. That's being a little transparent and, kind of open and open-minded with, the pricing. So if it's as is, this is why it's as is, right?
Right. So you open it, you do run the risk on the one. I did actually have the inspection on my Renton property done, Candace, over the weekend. I got an inspector. Inspectors can go out there and do this pretty much next day. I talked with the seller on Friday. He's like, if we don't get any showings, let's go ahead and have the inspector come out for the weekend. And then this week, basically, we'll work on repairing those items or getting a contractor out there. That way, hopefully we can get an offer next weekend and know what to do with our price.
Right.
But not all houses, when I sent the report to the seller, he's an old guy. He goes, oh my gosh, did the inspector hate my house? I mean, literally, that's what he said. So you have to be careful. It was an older home built in so there's things that certainly he's not going to fix, but he almost, because there was so many things that had to be put into the inspection report, you also run the risk that now we have to disclose. Now we have to actually put that up. So yeah, we're in that kind of awkward stage. I think, should we have got it? And I think I'm going to err with the side. Yes, I'm glad we know it now. Let's get an ant person to come out, because there's some ants, there's some rodents under the crawl space that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And I think on the other thing is the electrical work. They replaced the panel, right, Candace, but they didn't replace some of the circuit breakers and some of those things. It wasn't like they did a full job. So I don't know if my seller is going to do all that, but at least I know, right? At least I can go out and say, okay, well, we priced it at whatever the price is, 800, but we had dropped it by 25 because of the floor plan and because of the electrical that needs to be done. I think I have an easier time selling that than if I just don't know. And then I have to, a buyer runs into a first-time home buyer going, gosh, I got to put up $450 for an inspection. And then I don't know if I'm going to even have the seller do these items, right? Because it's as is. So every situation's a little bit different. So kind of talked about pre-inspections, but if we look at the screen on the text message, I purposely put this text message up because this is a real deal. This happened also over the weekend. So this, I believe it was a seller procured inspection report. So the buyer's agent, we said they reviewed the inspection report, the water heater, furnace, and AC will need to be replaced. The inspection report calls out slow draining the bathroom sinks, but makes no mention of any toilet inspections. She flushed the toilet, noticed the toilet was not drained properly. Therefore, if we go mutual, they will have to have the property inspected again. This is a good call on our buyer's agent's point that not an inspection. The inspection might have called out, the furnace and the water heater and some other things that need to be replaced. But most inspectors, unless you ask them and you pay the additional fee, they will not do a sewer scope. So be very careful that you're not saying, oh yeah, well, they inspected or they did a seller pre-inspection, but they didn't actually do the scoping of the sewer line. So be careful on that. Flushing the toilet, those are some red flags. If it's not flushing correctly or not draining properly, there might be an issue with the sewer line. The agent that we didn't represent, this is not our agent, the water heater will be replaced prior to closing. So this is some good verbal, I would say anytime you're texting, that's verbal negotiation. That is not in writing. So these kinds of things, if you are negotiating, need to be put on proper notices and proper forms between the parties. It's okay to verbally, have a conversation with the other agent. I don't think there's anything wrong with this, but you do have to officially put something on paper if you are negotiating for repairs. And that would be a 35R. Sometimes it makes sense just to kill the deal altogether and just go back to market. And I think that might be what's going to happen here with the way this is negotiating out. I don't think the seller is going to fix anything more than the water heater and what they kind of texted here. So again, every situation is a little bit different. And if you are in the middle of a negotiation, that's what Candace and I and Shannon and all of the licensed employees that we have, we're here to kind of be a sounding board. And I know that you guys have posted on our group page. There's nothing wrong with that too, to get a second set of eyes on your negotiation. We certainly can help with that. But just realize that when you're looking at big ticket items, that impacts the negotiation. And if there's more than just like, say, 3 big ticket items, and the seller's not willing to kind of play ball with you, this may not be the right property for your buyer. You may want to exit the whole negotiation and go find them a better deal. But to get a laundry list of like 2 pages worth of stuff, or to have so many things asked for, sometimes it might be better just to find another property. Have you run into that situation, Candace, where you have a buyer who's very unrealistic, and how do you deal with those unrealistic buyers?
Well, I mean, it's some unrealistic buyers, they're just going to be unrealistic. And in that case, you know what, we might need to start our search at a newer home or a newer construction home. It's part of the process of being a buyer. And, not everything is going to be even brand spanking new. We've seen new construction with laundry lists of items that need to be repaired as well. So it's really, let's focus on what you can ideally get. And then these small things, if the door's not latching properly, that's some unscrewing and, simple things that you would do with normal maintenance of your house, over time. So really just diving into that conversation.
Together, there's nothing wrong with throwing a home warranty in the negotiation too, right? I mean, if X, Y, and Z are in I love it. And the inspection report they usually write, it's exceeded its lifespan, right? Or life expectancy. And I've seen dishwashers last, older dishwashers last more than their life expectancy, but newer ones, I seem to get a bad rap. It's like every dishwasher I have, Candace, it was 4 years old is like, that thing's trashed after 4 years. But, my point is basically that, if you're dealing with negotiating and the inspector notes X, Y, or Z, or something mechanical that is exceeding its life expectancy, you might want to just negotiate for a home warranty. And that might be the way to handle that, so that gets replaced or fixed if it goes out, and then you don't have to worry about that. Certainly can ask for the seller to replace, but it might be if the seller is resistant to replace. They're like, it works just fine. It's not a problem. I see a lot of sellers getting really, really rigid when the buyer's agent doesn't utilize some of the resources they have available to them, such as a home warranty. And sometimes that's all that has to happen. There are many home warranty companies that we recommend. However, I do have some favorites. Fidelity and Old Republic seem to be the best right now, at least for the service and the follow through on the claims. Seller procured inspection report. So when you are authorizing an inspection for your sellers, to provide to the buyers, you do need to provide this notice. This notice also gets put in our file and it needs to be part of our purchase and sale agreement. We will be asking you for this if you are providing an inspection report or there's a supplement in your file. Please make sure that you have this available. We don't want to have a situation where the buyers, we have a claim after closing that is like, I didn't know that the sellers procured the inspection report. And this also puts everybody on notice that this is part of the Form 17. So in my case in Renton, I'm going to have to go ahead and upload the inspection report as well as the seller procured inspection notice so that the buyers know that it's part of a Form 17. It's for the seller's purposes and we're providing that to them. But they're advised, the last line, buyer is advised to procure their own inspection from a professional inspector chosen by the buyer. You probably want to have that somewhere in your transaction if you're not using the SPI, the BCR. Every company, I think John L. Scott, Windermere, all of the companies in Washington have these types of notices. We all kind of have our own notices when we're providing the seller procured. Well and septic, another way that people are terminating deals on the septic and on the well, or we're negotiating. It's becoming very fierce negotiation when it comes to deficiencies with the septic or with the well. There are notices there didn't used to be notices for this. We used to have to write it on a Form 34 and I was getting calls and text messages and emails and hold harmlesses, Candace, every single thing you can imagine. Poor Candace was getting text messages, I think a couple weekends ago, trying to figure out how do we keep this deal together because the well is not functioning correctly. Now there is a notice of termination for both. But as far as negotiating for both, with our new forms, we have a path to negotiate the well and the septic. But we're seeing a lot of deficiencies that across the board. I think it's like everybody that needs to sell and has a deficiency, Candace, it feels like they're all going
on the market.
So be careful if you're out there and your buyer beware if it's on a septic or a well. Make sure that they're also having, this inspection. In the buyer standpoint, the seller for the septic, the seller is required to pump the inspection. So how do you handle that? If you have a seller that's on septic, Candace, what are some kind of best tips that you can give that seller about their septic system?
About their septic, well, best tips and
do we do a septic pumping before we go on the market? I mean,
get it ahead of time, have that all done as soon as possible. Yeah, not after. I mean, if you can help it, get it done out the way. Pump and expect before. Exactly. Yes, Guy. Yes.
Yes, you're saving yourself a lot of hassle with it going back to market if you get that pumped. All the counties are going to require that that would be a seller line item fee. That is the way the contract's written. There is a section if you don't, or the seller doesn't, there is a section on the 22S and the 22WW and all of the various 22KC, all of these form numbers for septics that allows, there's a checkbox that allows for the buyer to attend the inspection. So what Candace is proposing is, I mean, if the buyer goes and attends the inspection, let's say I'm representing the house that Candace lists and she's already had it pumped, I'm going to have a very strong conversation with my buyer saying, hey, have you ever owned a home with a septic tank? If they're saying no, I'm like, okay, the seller has obviously pumped the tank. It looks like there's no deficiencies, but here is a copy of that inspection report that I want you to review. If you have any questions at all, I want you to contact that septic tank company who did pump and inspect the tank within whatever 30 days of when I got that on the supplements. When you represent the buyer, you have a due diligence to actually provide all of that information that's provided to you through the supplements. And I find it interesting that other companies don't train it this way, but I want to, as you guys, a lot of you are buyer's agents, you need to provide them with that information and let them do their due diligence. If they need to call and find out what kind of septic tank system this is, and figure out what the bill is like to have it pumped. I don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation, Candace, if I represent my buyer on your house. No offense, I appreciate you for getting that done because I want to know that it has no deficiencies. But my buyer has it, I mean, that will be their property. So after we close escrow and Candace has moved on, she got paid. Now my buyer is going to call me and say, Rochelle, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got this notice from Pierce County that I have to have my septic pumped within 6 months. I didn't know I had this bill that I have to pay every single 6 months. There are some septic systems that are designed in such a way where it requires more pumping than typical. So you wouldn't know that unless you actually called the actual pumper that could have probably told my buyer that. And I'm just giving you that as an example. There's a lot that goes on with the septic system, and different types and different drain fields and different components and electrical notices that can happen. Hopefully you're working with a good pumper and inspector, but not all septic pumping and inspections are made alike. I will say that. With the wells, so wells also, I don't know about septics, but septics, I seem to see all kinds of problems with septics lately, but also with wells, where you have two different types of well systems that could fail. Either it could fail on the type of water quality, and it could fail also on the type of system, the actual components of the well, how far it was drilled. One of our agents, Tony Kasnick, he just talked about this before he left out the door, Candace. He goes, I'm trying to save it's on life support. My deal's on life support right now, right? Because
we're all on life support.
Yeah, we're all kind of just trying to keep the deals together. But he's like, I learned something new today that on the well contingency, the guy told me there are two differences. There's a storage tank that's on the well, and that's where it stores the water. And then the holding tank is where it holds the poop. He goes, I didn't know that there's two different types of tanks that kind of hold the components that work in conjunction. He's like, I learned something new, and you will learn something new too if you attend those well inspections with your client. We represent the buyer, and in his case, the water quality is still out for review. We did the extension because he's on the old contract, so there's there was a deficiency that happened, and we didn't make that deadline. And so now we have an issue with actually how the well is, the kind of pumping, how quickly it's actually coming to the surface. So we're anticipating there's problems there. Home sale contingencies also, I wanted to put the 90K. This would be the notice to terminate if for some reason your buyer couldn't sell their property and they have to give notice, or they're going to waive their contingency and going to move towards closing because they were sent a notice from the seller that they were in receipt of another offer, intentionally trying to bump them out of position. This is the notice that you would use to communicate with either the buyer or the seller. So another notice on home sale contingencies: when you write a home sale contingency, you're not putting a closing date on your page 1. The 22B already stipulates that you're going to work within that timeline. So you do not put a closing date on. It's based on the 22B. And then when you deliver the 90K notice, that's how it's done. And when you deliver the 90K notice that say your property got under contract, you would also include a copy of your purchase and sale agreement that goes along with it, that has the dates of when that closes. And then the 22B follows along with what your closing date is going to be on your purchase. So pay close attention to possession dates and closing dates. My last slide is basically on the closing dates, Candace. I know this is stressful, and you get a lot of these questions we may not be able to put it back on the market. We talked about one that we had to dealt with in the past. Do you want to share with everybody about that?
Well, I mean, it's, well, I think my big overall take on this is, remember, all parties have to agree, right? It's not just because your buyer can close early, or just because your seller is demanding that, we close at a sooner date. Your contract has a closing date, right? And that's the goal, right? So I do my best to set that expectation of flexibility. But if you've got a situation where your buyer can close in 2 weeks, great. But do you really want to write that offer for 2 weeks? Play it safe. Go ahead and do our standard 30 days. I mean, it all does depend if you're competing or whatnot, but play it safe. Do the 30 days. Let them know that you can, we can actually perform. We can close sooner if this works out. But
So what can happen?
We've seen so much of this back and forth on closing date, and it's like the initial contract date is the closing date, right? And just because now your buyer's ready to go does not necessarily mean that the seller's going to be ready to go, or vice versa.
And this is the problem that I've run into, Candace, and this is kind of to illustrate your point a little bit more carefully, is so that you go ahead and close quick, And then for whatever reason, the buyer's lender couldn't get it done. And then now we're coming to extend, and the seller's like, I don't know if I want to sell my house now.
Yeah, don't want
Right?
to.
And
Yeah,
so then we have a position like, oh crap, we've already done inspections, we've already done appraisal, we've done all of these things. And because you tighten it down too much and now the lender couldn't perform, you're not using movement, I can assure you, on those types of deals. But they couldn't perform. And so now we have a situation where the seller doesn't have to close. If you've passed your July 7th date here, or the original date of July 1st, and you're asking for a week extension, they could just say no. And then you're out the deal. I mean, everything. There's nothing we can do if the parties do not agree to the extension on the 22Y. So Candace is right. Don't write them so tight that you can't deliver. And then the
I've
parties
seen a couple of those. I've seen a couple of those. It's like, what do I do? What do I do? I need an extension. Well, yeah, you need an extension.
The way to prevent some of those challenges, though, I think, Candace, is I think it's all about communication. So if we are not doing a good job of notifying the other party when we have an issue with financing, or like, the appraiser was delayed because he was out of town, or, again, communicate with the other party. Not communicating then the day before closing going, I need an extension, is not the way to handle this type of thing. You want to basically get ahead of those conversations before they happen as the agent. Same thing goes for earnest money. As soon as you know that my buyer is still stuck at work and she couldn't get down to the title and escrow company to drop up her earnest money check, or she didn't have the app on her phone. The more you can have those conversations, the more understanding that other agent on the other side of the deal will be with you. But to not hear from anything, that's where they basically come unglued, and then they're calling me and they're calling Candace and they're trying to figure out, like, what is this? I mean, are they going to stay with the deal, or are they going to back out? It's that uncertainty that doesn't bode well in a marketplace that we're in right now.
Right, right. I always say, let's peel the Band-Aid and let it heal.
Or I say, step into the punch. Let's just step into the punch and take the hit, because it's easier to take the beating initially than to let something fester. So we're here to help. If you have any questions about deals that are falling apart, the one thing I will say, and I don't want to have you say this to me anymore. I'm just going to be blunt today. But I hate it when you guys call me on the weekend and say, I am so sorry to bother you. It is not a bother. That's what I'm here for. It's like you start with an apology. No, let's just jump right into it. What's the problem? Who do you represent? And how can I help you save your deal? And I know Candace would feel the same way. And if you can't reach Candace, you call me. If you can't reach me, and call Shannon. We all are here to support you. There's plenty of help for everyone here on this call. And there's a support line. If you can't, if you're like, I don't know who to call, you can call the support line. There's always somebody that's going to be answering those calls. And I actually answer that support line on the weekend. So there's no reason why you can't get the help you need to keep the deal together. So no question is a bad question. I've had anything from, I can't get a hold of the other agent to present my notice, to, do I have the right to terminate? And how do I handle this complaint that this buyer that's unhappy with my services? I mean, you name it, I've heard it. And I think Candace is in the same boat. No question's a bad question. Anything else, Candace, that we need to cover? We're at 6:07. I knew it would go fast.
Yeah. I think it's just keep this in mind. We've got deals, we're trying to keep them together, and we are seeing, I think, not just Best Choice Realty, we are seeing a lot of rescissions. You can actually look at your hot sheets and see on a daily basis back on market, it's that number's creeping up and getting higher daily. So we trying to do our best, but it feels like there's this big tug of war between the buyers and the sellers right now. And yes, we're in between, and we're the ones who can really help make it stick. So try to be transparent, try to, what is the word? It's
be diplomatic, I think, and just kind of calming. I think that's one thing that when I get involved between the parties, when things are going south, the first thing I ask is, do you still want to buy the house?
Right.
I mean, is that our goal, is to move forward?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, I'm just losing sleep, then it's probably not best. Let's get you out of the deal. Let's figure out another plan. But just realize that if we go back to the marketplace, whether I'm a buyer or a seller, you're going to have another set of challenges. It is not easy. So you try everything you can to try to keep the parties calm through this process. And it's not easy. I know. And there's always
Communicate.
absolutely try to turn some lemons into lemonade, right? That's what, and oftentimes there is a better deal out there. So keep your positivity, and hopefully that helps giving you some tips on how to, I appreciate your input, Candace. I mean, you've dealt with a lot more in the recent month with some of the sales that you've done and the complexity and the calls you've taken from our agents. So I appreciate your input. And thank you, Shannon, for the slides. Hopefully that was helpful. Have a great week. Next Monday, Lori's going to be joining us for some marketing help. So stay tuned for that. So some of you probably haven't used our market center. She's going to go through that and how to use that system a little bit better. And that will be next Monday. Thanks so much. Have a great week.